Okay, now in this interface I'll show you a menu called the control menu. So if I pop that up, I do that by pressing and holding down the mouse button with another modifier key on the keyboard. And I see 8 commands surrounding the cursor. I can drag within this gray circle to select whatever command I like. And once I drag far enough away from the center, once I leave the gray circle, I pass this threshold, this radial threshold, and now I'm locked into that command, the move command in this case, and any further dragging I do is to provide the argument that goes with that command, to execute that command. So dragging to the north chooses the move command, and then continuing to drag simply executes that command. So I release when I'm done. If instead I drag to the west, well, that's to rotate the shape. So let me show you that on a bigger shape. It'll be easier to see. There I'm rotating it. Dragging to the south is to perform a uniform scaling, so changing the size of the shape. Now, one thing you might notice with this menu is something that could have been improved when it was programmed. When I was programming this thing, sometimes the menu has a tendency to hide what's underneath it, especially if the shape is smaller than the menu. So it actually would have been better for me to program this such that once the user has left the gray circle and they've chosen the command they want, that the menu could simply disappear or at least become a lot more transparent so it wouldn't hide what's underneath. Something maybe more interesting to notice is that we can think of this menu as a gestural interface. And yet, unlike many other gestural interfaces, the user doesn't need to first learn the gestures by heart to use them. If I want to translate a shape, that is, if I want to move it, maybe I don't know that the gesture for that is to start dragging towards the north. So all I have to do is pop open the menu, I find the command I want, and the very act of dragging towards it and doing that over and over again as a novice, by doing that, I can't help but eventually learn by heart that that's the gesture I need to move it. And so I'll start doing that very fast. If I want to move it to the left, I'll drag up and then to the left. If I want to move it down, I drag up and then down. Okay. Rotation, I'll eventually learn that's a drag to the west. So I drag to the west and then rotate. Or a scale drag down and then up if I want to make it bigger. So this creates this. It enables a smooth transition from a novice user to an expert user. Now notice that this is very different from the way a traditional pull-down menu works. It's very common for us to see drop-down menus that have accelerator or keyboard shortcuts listed in the menu. Now those keyboard accelerators are a way for an expert to go faster, but they don't allow for a smooth transition from novice to expert. Why? Well, because if you don't already know the keyboard shortcut, you have to go into the menu. And once you get to the menu, the most natural thing to do is to just click on the command that you want. If you want to learn the keyboard shortcut, you have to stop yourself and make a conscious effort to notice that keyboard shortcut. Okay, so that's different from this control menu I'm showing you, where as a novice, if I don't know how to rotate, well, I go in the menu, I navigate towards rotate, I drag towards it, and by doing that over and over again, I can't help but eventually learn it by heart. Another thing to notice is that the contents of the menu are not the same if I click on the background. So when I click on the background, I get some commands that have a global context. They operate on the entire canvas. So I can translate within the canvas or zoom in and out, whereas if I click on a shape, I get commands that have an effect on that shape. So actually there are 3 pieces of information that are being transmitted or expressed to the computer with a single drag. The first piece of information is identifying the object I want to modify. That's done with the initial press down with the mouse button. The second piece of information is the command I want, which is specified by the initial direction of the drag. And then the third piece of information is the parameter that goes with that command to execute it, and that's provided by the continuation of the drag. So there you have it, the control menu. Now I have a little design problem to share with you if you're interested in continuing to watch this video. I haven't explained all the commands in this menu. So I didn't show this one, move and rotate. The way that works is when you select move and rotate, it's sort of as if your cursor was a finger on a sheet of paper. And as you drag around, you can move the sheet of paper and also rotate it around its center of mass. There's another command for rotate and scale, so that allows you to rotate and uniformly scale the shape at the same time. There's also a non-uniform scale command, so in X and Y you can provide different factors of scaling. Now, other commands that we could have put in here would be commands for inking. So imagine that you wanted to be able to write down a little note to yourself in cursive. Well, we could have had a command called ink, and once you drag past the gray circle, you start depositing ink as if your cursor was a pencil or a pen. Another command that might make sense would be lasso selection. So down here we could have something called lasso, and as soon as you leave the gray circle and you've selected lasso, well, you start drawing a lasso, and whatever is captured inside that lasso when you release gets selected. There's a little problem with commands like inking or lasso selection, though, and that is that they don't start executing until the user leaves this gray circle. So whatever point they leave at, let's call that point the intersection point, the point where the cursor crosses the threshold of that gray circle. Okay, when the user leaves that intersection point, when they cross through it, if that's where we start drawing the lasso, that's a problem, because then it becomes difficult for the user to anticipate where a lasso is going to start, and the user might have to mentally adjust for that and move their cursor in the opposite direction. For example, if the user wants the lasso to start here, they might try to move the cursor in the opposite direction, open up the menu, and then drag down and hope that the intersection point ends up close enough to where they want it to start. Okay. So a second approach would be to say, well, if the user selects lasso, let's just make the lasso start in the center of the menu, which is where the drag started. It's where the user pressed down. But that creates its own problem, because now the user cannot control the initial direction of the lasso. They're forced to drag in the direction of the command, whereas they might want the lasso to be directed towards the north or some other direction, right? So maybe there's a third solution to this, and you might actually want to pause the video at this point and think if you can find a third solution. So here's a third approach you could take, and it would be to say that when the user clicks down with their mouse button, the menu appears, and instead of having a menu with a fixed position, we instead say that the mouse cursor is fixed. So now my mouse cursor cannot move, and instead the menu is going to move, and furthermore the menu is going to move in the opposite direction of the mouse. So if lasso was my southwest item, what I would do is put my cursor where I want the lasso to start, press down. Let's say it's here that I want to start the lasso. So I press down. Now imagine that the mouse cursor is fixed, it's frozen in place. I would move my mouse southwest, and the menu would respond by moving northeast. It would essentially bring the intersection point to me, so that the place where I click down and the intersection point I pass through are going to be the same point. And then I can start my lasso there, my ink there. So maybe that solves the problem. Well, unfortunately, it creates a new problem. This third approach I just described will only work with an indirect pointing device like a mouse. It won't work with direct input like a stylus on a screen. Because if you have a stylus on a screen, you want the cursor to always be right under the stylus, even if you're not necessarily drawing that cursor. And the third approach I just described would cause the cursor and the stylus position to no longer coincide, which would be probably pretty weird for the user. So maybe there's some fourth approach you can think of to solve this problem.